Okay, so I didn't put it up in. So that's the Bergs and Samuelson social welfare function. This is there are a number of different versions of this. This is Jeremy Bentham, who we like because he's still in a box in UCL. You can see him sometimes, and that's his. How would you say this in greatest good for the greatest number? The Bentham idea. Okay. The third challenge. So we've looked at philosophical challenge, some theoretical issues. Now in applied economics, one of the challenges is how do you put a value on nature, and in particular on, as we see nature, natural capital stock and the ecosystem service flows that come from that stock. And there's been an awful lot of ink spilt about the valuation issue from conservation biologists that many of us have worked with over the years, telling us that nature is intrinsically valuable and you can't put monetary values on most of the important things in nature, to more pragmatic applied economists like most of us who say, yes, there are lots of things we can put a reasonable value on, while there are some things we can't. So I tried to enter the debate, and I found in the philosophical literature, it's been a long, long time, that the natural philosophers see nature in terms of a 4-quadrant valuation concept. And they split nature's value into anthropocentric instrumental value, which is typically the way we as economists interpret ecosystem services. Ecosystem services are valuable because they bring utility and welfare to us. Yeah? They are instrumentally valuable to us. How do you get into intergenerational equity and sustainable development? Well, you have to say there's a stewardship ethic here. We have to look after this stock of capital and the flows of ecosystem services because of the instrumental value that we're going to pass on. But quite a lot of conservation biologists and deep ecologists and some ecological economists believe there's a second anthropocentric value in nature, and that's called anthropocentric intrinsic value. The anthropocentric just means that we're imposing this. So in intrinsic value terms, we are saying as individuals, we think ecosystem X or this part of natural capital Y is valuable intrinsically. There's issues with this, but there are two other parts to the matrix. There's non-anthropocentric instrumental value, which fortunately for economists is not an issue because it's not a moral, ethical, or economic issue. It just means that one part of non-human nature relies on another part of non-human nature. So predator-prey relationships are a typical example people give. So we don't have to be overly concerned with that box. And then there's this box, non-anthropocentric intrinsic value, which is a very, very big debate in circles not frequented by economists, but by philosophers and ethicists and others, and referred to by ecological economists on occasion. I'll just spend 2 minutes on that. Going right back to where we started about philosophy, consequentialism, and utilitarianism versus rule-making philosophies. When sustainable development was under debate, utilitarian economists and philosophers were very wary about the concept because intuitively they could see it was leading down a contract rules-based system. And so an economist stroke philosopher, Derek Parfit, came up with a problem called, it's become known as Parfit's paradox, when, as a critique of sustainable development, he said, this is not going to lead anywhere, theoretically, because the future generations of individuals you're talking about don't exist. They are truly possible people. They're not real. You know? They only become real when two parts of the gender divide get together and a real person is born. Yeah? So for Parfit, it made no sense to talk about the rights and interests of future generations because they didn't exist. The moral, ethical responsibility lay with the present, not with some fanciful idea about future generations. The critique of Parfit is, yes, it's true, individuals in the future are only possible. They're only possibilities now, but the probability is very high that the next generation will exist, and the generation after that, and as I mentioned earlier on, generations overlap. And so Parfit paradox is still out there, but it's not, hasn't been a stumbling block to sustainable development. But the idea of rights and interests is still out there. Okay? So the Parfit paradox was, do future people, who are already possible, have rights and interests? Because we're going to come up with a rule that guarantees them capital stocks over time. As if in deontological thing, they have a right to this under that Rawlsian system. And this little baby here introduces rights and interests not to humans, but to non-humans. So the philosophical question now becomes, does non-human nature have a right or an interest equivalent to human rights? Yeah. So a right is a very formal thing enshrined in law, and is a formal construct. An interest is a weaker rule which says, when I take an action, I should have the interests of X and Y in mind when I take this action, but I still might take the action. But I haven't ignored them. So should non-human nature have a right to existence, or should we just take their interests into account when we do cost-benefit analysis or whatever else we're doing? And for the deep ecologists, the answer is non-human nature does have rights and interests. A massive debate over decades of time about the, I'll use an economist expression, the Pandora box that was opened on this issue. Because once you say, yes, non-human nature has a right or an interest, where do you stop? And that's an unanswered question. They're still arguing about it. Some in the deep, deep ecology community believe that non-sentient things that can't sense pleasure and pain have a right and an interest. Landscapes have a right and interest. Others try and draw a line in terms of the amount of consciousness and intelligence, call it that different species and entities have. But once you open it up, it's very difficult to draw a line. So for economics, I think the furthest we can go is to we'll go back now. Is to go back to intrinsic value and say, yes, we can conceive of situations where individuals place intrinsic value on elements in the environment. And we can get a monetary valuation estimate of that if we use techniques like Actually started with contingent valuation, choice experiments, and so on. Yeah. And you might get as far as existence value and other concepts that we've been investigating as environmental economists. Yeah. Okay.